All right, the next case to come before the court is State of Ohio versus Kevin James Slaughter. Mr. Slaughter's argument is waived. The state may proceed. No reason to reserve time for rebuttal.
May it please the court, my name is Nicholas Bonamini and I represent the state of Ohio, the appellee in this matter. Good morning. On January 27, 1993, the appellant in this matter withdrew his former pleas of not guilty and entered a negotiated plea of guilty to aggravated murder with a capital specification in violation of RC 290301 and a negotiated plea of guilty to aggravated murder and aggravated robbery in violation of RC 291101. The negotiated pleas were for an agreed aggregate sentence of 30 years to life with no parole for 30 years plus 10 to 25 actual imposed consecutive from case number 92CR041574, which was the aggravated robbery case. On January 27, 1993, the trial court accepted the appellant's guilty pleas and sentenced him to life with parole eligibility after 30 years consecutive to case number 92CR041574, the aggravated robbery case. And then in the aggravated robbery case, sentenced him to 10 to 25 years imposed as actual incarceration consecutive to the aggravated murder case. The appellant did not file a direct appeal from those cases. On February 15, 2018, over 25 years after the appellant was sentenced in 1993, he filed a motion to be resentenced in the trial court. The appellant argued that at the time he was convicted for aggravated murder with a capital specification, the trial court was required to impose a mandated sentence of death, life imprisonment with parole eligibility after serving 20 full years of imprisonment, or life imprisonment with parole eligibility after serving 30 full years of imprisonment. The appellant argued that the trial court failed to impose such a sentence because the January 27, 1993 sentencing entry stated that the appellant was sentenced to life with parole eligibility after 30 years, rather than life with parole eligibility after 30 full years. On February 27th, the Honorable John Maraldi denied the appellant's motion and stated, in part, in defendant's motion for resentencing, he alleges that the Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections has denied him good time credit based on his 30-year sentence before he is eligible for parole. Pursuant to RC 292903C2, in effect at the time of defendant's sentence, the defendant is required to serve the full 30 years of imprisonment because he pled guilty to an indictment that contained an aggravated circumstance specification. The appellant now appeals the trial court's denial of his motion to be resentenced. He alleges one assignment of error. The trial court erred as a matter of law when it denied Slaughter's motion to be resentenced to correct his sentence pursuant to RC 292903C2. The appellant, as an initial matter, the appellant captioned his motion as a motion to be resentenced, but it is properly heard as a petition for post-conviction relief as defined in RC 295331. Pursuant to that statute, a post-conviction petition must be timely or satisfy a number of limited exceptions. Based on the way the law changed in 95, the appellant's petition was required to be filed by September 21, 1996. It was not filed until over 21 years after that date. As such, the appellant had to show that he met one of the two factors, or both of the factors in 295331A1A and A1B. He did not attempt to show that. He cannot show that because there's no evidence he was unavoidably prevented from discovery of the facts upon which he relies, and this error regarding the sentencing and the sentencing hearing, he can't show A1B because he's not challenging a death sentence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment after 30 years. He argues, though, that his claim is not barred by res judicata or untimeliness because the trial court's alleged error rendered his sentence void. The appellant argues that because the trial court sentenced him to life with parole eligibility after 30 years but did not qualify the word years with the word full, the trial court did not sentence him to life with no parole prior to his serving 30 years of imprisonment, as was required by the statute. His void in this argument fails because this court has consistently noted that the Ohio Supreme Court has applied its void sentence analysis in limited circumstances and has held that it will not extend its reach without clear direction from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has held that sentencing errors do not render a sentence void if the court has jurisdiction and statutory authority to act. It has outlined a number of limited, narrow exceptions to that general principle. In Williams, the Supreme Court identified the Ohio Supreme Court identified 3 areas where it held that a sentence was void. When the trial court fails to impose a statutorily mandated term of post-release control, when it fails to include a mandatory driver's license suspension in the offender's sentence, and when it fails to include a mandatory fine in the sentence. The appellant has not alleged that any of those errors occurred in the sentence, and he hasn't cited any authority showing that this voidness doctrine should apply here. It should render a sentence void. Former RC 292903C2 provided that following a conviction for aggravated murder with a capital specification, the trial court was required to impose either death, life imprisonment after 24 years, or life imprisonment with eligibility for parole after 34 years. The 8th District in State v. Rembert heard a similar case to this, where a defendant had been sentenced to life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 30 years, and the word years wasn't qualified by the word full. The 8th District noted first that the word full is significant in that it determines whether a prisoner's term can be reduced for good behavior or earned credit. When a defendant is sentenced to 25 full years or 34 years of imprisonment, the prison term cannot be diminished for good behavior or by credit earned. The 8th District then went on to conclude that pursuant to the aggravated murder sentencing statute, when a defendant is sentenced to life imprisonment with parole eligibility after either 25 or 30 years, the years are necessarily full years because full years are the only available punishment authorized by statute when the defendant is ordered to serve 25 or 30 years before becoming eligible for parole. The court was examining the current version of 2903, but it's very similar to the version that was in effect at the time the appellant was sentenced. The difference is, at the time the appellant was sentenced, there were only 3 options. It was death, 24 years, or 34 years. Now it's death, 20 years, 25 full years, or 34 years. But in either case, when the defendant is sentenced to 30 years of imprisonment following a conviction, as in the appellant's case, the only option for the court is full years, and thus, necessarily, a sentence of 30 years is 34 years. As a result, the trial court omitting the word full from its entry did not create reversible error at the time. The appellant did not file a direct appeal to allege any reversible error. Now, going forward, it does not render the sentence void, even assuming that it had been reversible at the time. For all the foregoing reasons, I'd ask that you, I respectfully request that you overrule the appellant's assignment of error and that you uphold the trial court's recent denial of his motion to be resentenced. If there are no questions, I see the rest of my time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. The court will take the matter under advisement and issue a written decision, which will be mailed to both sides as well as posted on our website and that of the Ohio Supreme Court.